Okay, so welcome everybody to this first session with our panel. And this is very much, as you would see from the program, a scene setting kind of panel. So we're looking to have regional cooperation across the three regions that are represented here, right? The Swana region, the Southwest Asia, North Africa region, that's the Swana region, the Mediterranean, and the Balkans. So we've invited people who are kind of representing those different regions to talk about and briefly introduce those regions to give some sense of some of the possibilities and challenges of cooperation across these three areas. So they'll each speak for about 7-8 minutes or so. There'll be a facilitated conversation, and then invite you also to make inputs from your experience and to ask any questions around this. So we're delighted to have Omar to start it all off as the representative of Beirut. They are our host, and obviously from Zurich Theatre as well, whose shows we have seen over the last while. And yeah, I mean, Omar has kind of been a very well-respected and highly appreciated speaker at various online forums as well as others that we've had as the Atelier. So we are very happy to have you with us today. Omar, over to you.
Thank you. I'm happy because I've done that online twice, I think, during the last 2 years. It was very nice to speak with the festival during those events, but it was also very depressing because it was online. And I'm happy and grateful today. Grateful first because you feel like listening to me and at 9 in the morning. It's painful. Even my daughter don't want to listen to me that early. And I'm grateful because you are here and you are taking generously part of our festival. And we are also, with all the team, we are grateful for that. We are happy to see you in the performances. We are happy to see you in the city because your presence also gives a sense of normality. And this sense of normality that we have been longing for during the last 3 years, because as you may know, it wasn't quite easy 3 years in Beirut, especially for cultural life. We cancelled our festival last year and the year before. So it's the first time that we're doing this biennale. It's a biennale was supposed to take to be in 2020. It didn't take place. We did a depressing version online. It was supposed to take place in 2022 also, and we tried to do it in 2021, but it didn't work because of the crisis, the inflation, and everything, and the COVID also. And this year we managed finally to do it. After the explosion and the inflation and the fact that 15 years of work have been blown in 3 minutes, none of us in the team wanted to do anything anymore. We couldn't find a reason. Why should I do a festival nowadays in Beirut when there is a lot of people who cannot even afford electricity? I don't know if you understand what it is not to afford electricity. It's mean also not to be able to afford a refrigerator. So we do not see it a lot from that perspective, but many houses in my neighborhood, for example, cannot afford a refrigerator, so cannot store food, meaning also that cannot afford food. This is how bad is the situation. So what does it mean to make a festival? And how can I pull out myself with integrity? Because we were yesterday with Inge. Is she here? With Inge, we were speaking a lot about integrity. With integrity, pull ourselves from that black hole in which we were. That means depression, post-traumatic stress. Everybody suffer from that in Beirut. It's normal. It's nothing exceptional in Lebanon, maybe in the whole region actually. And decide to do a festival. Zukak Sidewalk was an international theater festival before, meaning in the sense where we used to invite big names of European theater, American theater, trying to put it next to trendy names in Lebanon, doing a festival where funders would be happy, the audience will be happy because they will have the impression of watching important artists. And we couldn't do that anymore. Something in the integrity wasn't there. We couldn't anymore do something that will make us feel that there is something normal that is back, because nothing normal is back. When I speak about a sense of normality while you are here, that means that it's trying to be normal, but it's acknowledging the fact that nothing is fine, but still we are here together. So this year, in order to be able to motivate ourselves, we decided what do I want? What do I do after an explosion? Usually, I gather my body parts after an explosion. I gather the rubbles of my house. I try to see what is left. For us, this year festival, which is a purely local edition of people with artists that were present in the 90s, meaning post-war situation, 80s, 90s, and bit younger generation, like the play you saw yesterday of Aysam Khalid, our generation, meaning us, Kristal Khudur, Ali Shahrour, and the next generation that we mentored 2 years ago, Jana Bumatar, that you will watch tonight, I think. I don't know if it's on your program. Hiba Najam, that will cook for you at the lunch break with the performance. And the generation that still didn't start. The generation that nobody ever heard about. They are doing their first project. They are trying. If you're going today to see Mada Harib, we're speaking about those people. So for us, this festival is not about only the artistic quality. It's the whole monstrous body that we constructed from the people that are still here, because we wanted to see what kind of bodies the cultural scene have today in Beirut. And when you look at our poster, we insisted to put the name on the poster. It's like the name of the missing, or it's like a memorial, or it's like the attendees who are still here, and it's a body, and it's the body of the theater scene, dance scene, music scene. If you see, for example, in the music, there is death metal with experimental music, with techno music. Death metal, for example, was for us who grew up in the 90s. You tell me when I should stop speaking, because I can continue. Death metal, for example, was for us in the 90s the only place where a young teenager could go see people from his age without being in a gathering of youth under a religious party, under a military training, and youth didn't have much to gather around. So when the government noticed that so many youth were gathering under something that they cannot control, and mainly it's something that is against the system, they voted it. And they said death metal music, heavy metal music is satanic. So everyone with a tattoo or with curly hair or piercing, they used to arrest him and put him in jail for 24 hours and try to stigmatize him with drugs. And so we brought back this scene also that for us was something vital in the 90s, with experimental music that is during the 2000 was one of the only how to say non-commercial, non-elitist, really elitist festival of music, where at the beginning they used to start to hit casserole. It was unbearable, but this music has developed to become something very important in the cultural scene and very representative of the cultural scene in Lebanon. And now the techno music that is like what you heard in our play, that is becoming also the underground music scene in Lebanon and artistic scene. That means it's the place where people go to think, even if it's through music. And in a period like the one we are living, what you try to do in our play, there is nothing to think anymore. There is only our body that are present. And in order to have integrity in our way of thinking, a festival, a performance, a gathering, is to start with a sense of meaning, putting bodies in the same room, putting plays in the same festival, and see what happens. And we're waiting the end of next week to see what will happen with that festival and what does it mean, and if there was actually integrity in it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to ask Lina to continue in terms of setting the scene for this particular region, and then we'll go on to Ellada to talk about the more Mediterranean area, and then Eckhard with his international experience of working in this region and elsewhere for him to conclude. You would have noticed on the program that we were supposed to have had another speaker, Mira, but she is not well, so we are just having these speakers on the panel today. Lina.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, marhaba, and all the rest. Thank you all. I would like to thank the Festival Academy for inviting me again to the Atelier. It's really a privilege, and it's wonderful to see everybody again physically and not online. So, Eckhard, you want me to continue on the scene, the political, cultural scene in the Middle East, in our region. Thank you, Omar, for highlighting all the challenges. Challenges in the Middle East are diverse. Okay, we do not all have the same, but the one thing in common is funding the arts. And for example, I'll give an example of Jordan, where it is a monarchy. We have a government, parliament, etc. And there is a fund to support the performing arts organized by the government through festivals. So lately we had the Jordan Theater Festival, and I think it's the 29th edition, where Jordan was able to invite theater groups from Iraq, from Maghreb, I think, and other neighboring countries, except Syria, because of the war. So even though previously we always used to have troops from Syria and Lebanon. So somehow Jordan, even though is going through a huge economic crisis with the inflation and all of this, and poverty rate is on the increase, the government managed to do this festival, which was great for theater artists because they fund Jordanian productions. Also, there was a thriving scene in music industry in Jordan, independent music industry by many groups, and the reasons of why the music industry and music groups thrive better and can fund themselves is a long story that I won't go into details in. We can do that in the working groups. Also, in our area, we were able to do the ACDF, Amman Contemporary Dance Festival, in May, which is part of Masahat, and the partners are Lebanon, Omar, Ra'um al-Rajih, Palestine, Syria, and Jordan. Syria stopped during the war, but we have managed to continue holding the festival, and it's run by Rania Qamhawi. You met her during the last Atelier. So under extreme difficulties, we were able to hold it, and the troops would travel from Lebanon, go to Jordan, Palestine, back to Jordan, and then travel to their countries. Funding for these kinds of activities would come from international organizations, cultural centers. I should say that we, at least in Jordan, and I'm sure it's in Lebanon, we are grateful to international funding organizations, because otherwise, without them, we would not be able to hold any kind of festivals or independent activities. Key donors and funders are DROSOS, the European Union, embassies in Jordan, the US Department of State, not USAID. USAID supports the government. The Foreign Department of State supports cultural activities. But all these fundings that come also from the Norwegians, and they fund also Palestinian performing arts groups. The funding comes with conditions, like themes. You know, you need to address a certain theme in your festival or in your theater productions or dance productions. So sometimes it's good and sometimes it defeats the objective. But again, you know, we work around it, and at the end of the day, we produce what we feel is essential, and the themes and the topics that we feel the audience would accept, they would resonate with, and feel grateful that we are presenting these performances. So after the pandemic, there was a thirst by people to go and attend. So in fact, we've had more audiences attending festivals and productions recently than ever before. This is one aspect. The other thing is also international organizations like ACITAJ, which is a partner also with ITI. ACITAJ is an international association for young people's theater. And my center, we're the National Center for Culture and Arts. We are an NGO, non-for-profit, non-governmental organization. We host ACITAJ Jordan, and we represent ITI, the International Theater Institute in Jordan. These two organizations are networks that really collaborate with artists in the region. So lately, we had the executive committee meeting of ACITAJ International in Jordan. And to be able to host them, the rule is that you have to pay for their accommodation and their travel, right? And, you know, I said, we can't afford it. We don't have money from the government. We can barely sustain ourselves. So they broke the rules. And I say that as an example because rules are made to be broken, you know. If you want to collaborate and network with our region, you have to understand. I don't know by you, who do I mean? But on a global level, you need to understand and respect our situation to create a network and to create exchange of experiences. Otherwise, it won't work. So the executive committee meeting came to Jordan during the Jordan Theater Festival. They were able to see performances from other Arab countries. And ACITAJ also held its regional workshop called The Art of Listening, Babel, The Art of Listening, and it's funded by the European Union, so at least we had money to do the workshop. And we had artists, theater artists who work in children's theater from Lebanon, from Egypt, and from the 3 countries. So that worked very well, and we presented the outcome. We created short scenes that relate to children's theater age 4 to 10, which is an age group that is not really addressed in children's theater. So that was a successful story of a collaboration between the government, the Ministry of Culture, and at the NGO sector. Another thing I wanted to say that politically speaking, we live in a turmoil. Of course, we're surrounded by conflict and wars. But what is happening is that, for example, in Egypt, if you want to collaborate, we have a project with them. We could not implement it because you cannot transfer money to civil society organizations or art organization festivals other than government, because government does not require you to send them money, for example, in theater festivals. And they have a lot of theater festivals and cinema festivals in Egypt. But to work with the independent groups, they made it impossible. They cannot receive money transfer, and it's the same in Lebanon, but on a different scale. Yani. But in Egypt, you can't work with them because you can't transfer the money to them. So you carry cash. Yani it's a ridiculous situation, but there are ways to go around it. And what else? Yeah, political structures vary, and the sustainability of arts and artists is directly related to the political structure and to cultural norms. We are witnessing in our region a transformation of values. There are people who are going into the extreme radicalization. It's religious and it's also ideological. And these people actually get funding to implement, to propagate their views and their ideas through the arts. ويمكن أنس knows about this, and what's شو اسمه أمجد. Where's أمجد? Sorry, because Amjad, I'd like him to talk about his story in Karaj Theater, where they were accused of something and the police came and, tried to close the space, and it's all conspiracies. Yani, there are people who want to stop any form of performing arts to exist anyway, and there are people who want to support. So in our region, usually municipalities kind of are encouraged to support performing arts activities. And we're very also careful with content, with what we present, because there is some kind of censorship, especially if you are opposing the regime. And there's this, the dilemma is, do you want to be totally independent and work so hard to raise funds to be able to produce art, like it is in Lebanon, where there is no government, so people work, it's self-initiatives. And it's so successful. I was so impressed in these past 2 days with the cultural scene and production scene, but it's done by people, okay? So if you want that, then it's independent and it's free. And if you want to be controlled by the government, then you get funding. But then all your ideas, your style, your head will be structured according to what the government wants, like Syria was before, right? Syria had fantastic theater, cinema productions, television, all of this, but it was all controlled and funded by the government, right? Similarly in the Soviet Union, similarly in many places where the government is in control, you get a lot of money to produce according to their own rules and ideologies. So where do we go from there? What is better for us? In Jordan, we feel it's a balance. You kind of work around certain objectives and try to get the benefit of both. But the private sector in Jordan would support sports activities, philanthropy. They would go for sports activities rather than festivals. But in Jordan, if you have royal patronage for a festival or a theater production or a dance production, then the private sector will support you, like telecom companies, for visibility. Okay, so it's complicated, but I feel optimistic that there is a generation of youth, young people, who are really forceful, and they are using untraditional spaces to present their work, whether it's in dance, like Anas, and theater in remote areas, in spaces that are not really theaters, but have been transformed into artistic spaces. And this is new in Jordan, and it's working, and the acceptance and the support for that is great, because 70% of the Jordanian population is under the age of 40. So this new generation has an impact on others, and we're hoping that this will expand and will get the support of international organizations to support these independent groups to be able to network and travel. And the challenge is travel, visas, is tremendous. It's becoming even more complicated. Between Arab countries in Al-Maghrib and in Al-Mashriq, like in Morocco, if you're a woman and you are less than 40 years old, you have to get a visa clearance. You know, there are strange, huh? Sorry, أنت من تونس عرفت. We keep getting these new rules that do not make sense. So I feel there is a way to, cut off connections. The other new thing that's happening is Saudi Arabia. All of a sudden, Saudi Arabia is open to art, theater, dance, music. Of course, they started with prominent Arab singers, who attract all kinds of audiences. I don't like concerts, so I wouldn't go. And they have transformed spaces into fantastically equipped theaters with high tech. You can create anything in the spaces that they have done in Al-Ula and in historical places that have been transformed into performing arts venues. And now they're working on training their youth in theater and dance, and the transformation is tremendous. How beneficial it will be for our region, because they have the money, we still need to see, but we need to tap into that market, maintaining our dignity and values, and to see how we can collaborate and use, their intention of making the arts accessible to their people. And population in Saudi Arabia is quite high. It's not like the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which is totally different. And they also have the money. But in Saudi Arabia, I feel if there is some kind of collaboration in the future, they will be holding festivals and music groups and all of this. Thank you.
Cool. Mike, is it okay if we do a 1-minute stretch?
We're actually going to do a 10-minute stretch.
Oh.
But, I mean,
Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you both for introducing this conversation. So a lot of really interesting things have kind of come up. So first, let me tell you 2 things about me, if you don't know. So I ran for the past 4 years and co-run for the past 2 a festival in Cyprus called the Buffer Fringe Performing Arts Festival. And also this was in like a month ago, it was a location of the previous Atelier for young festival managers, which was absolutely brilliant. And as part of this festival, what we did this year is that we invited curators to come in and each curate. Our festival is a 3-day festival. We're pretty poor. So we wish it were more, but it's not. So for each day of the festival, we invited a guest curator to come in. So we had a curator, a young Turkish Cypriot woman did 1 day, Lebanese actor and director did another day, and a super unorthodox group of Cypriot Australian and Cypriot did the 3rd day. And as part of this experiment, I wanted to kind of reflect a little bit with you, like in the aftermath of it, what happened and how did we get there and how did it work? But before I do that, I wanted to acknowledge the performance yesterday and to say that I would say the maturity of thought and the maturity of dramaturgy that I saw has, for me, what it signals is a great deal of integrity, because it has a great deal of honesty. Like, as you said, I think, this part of the world has reached a point whereby there's so much fatigue, this honesty that we saw last night on stage, it was insanely inspiring. And, it's the when I grow up, I want to be that play type of thing. It's that type of, coming out of it, it was that type of a thinking. Yeah, I appreciated it deeply because that's the type of work that we strive for. We're not there yet, but maybe we'll get there at some point. So going back to Cyprus in 2019, so the Buffer Fringe Festival is organized in a space, by a space called the Home for Cooperation. The Home for Cooperation is an NGO home, which is in between space between the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot community. And it was a space of, kind of multiple narratives that had come in through years. This is where the first intercommunal trouble started in the late 50s. First barbed wire was set there in the early 60s. And then it was a kind of a prisoners exchange station. And it was the first checkpoint to open in 2003. When the Home for Cooperation was established in 2011, it was a bit of kind of a, it was a break. It was going back to a place where that space was a possible space for people to meet, regular people, not the UN. So the idea behind putting together a festival, it was to give space to artists to be able to co-create, coexist, to think together, to challenge, hopefully the systems, because we have several. So the administrations on both sides, and the UN who has presence there, the armies, the police, like all of these entities that are there. So starting the festival in 2019, we did one very important thing, which was to bring the festival back to the buffer zone, because that's something that hadn't been done since the first festival in 2014. So we wanted to bring it back to the festival and try to bring all these people together. So for me, working with the administrations and the UN and the police, it is a little bit of international collaboration. And it's strangely so because we have, and this happens in a lot of places around this area, we have the presence of foreign armies, and we've had them for a long time. So foreign armies and foreign peacekeeping forces, they bring in another type of narrative. And this is something that we need to, I think, have a discussion with. So many times we see them as a body of, as physical bodies and as a kind of a body of peace building coming into our space. We don't really address them. But I think it's very important to bring everybody on the table and speak so we can co-create. So the festival happened there and in venues in the north and the south, and then 2020 came. Yay. So 2020 was basically, we put together a hybrid festival. And that's where I think this idea of regional and international collaboration really started for us. Because up to 2019, we were an international festival because we had international performances. But in 2020, we became an international festival because we had two groups of artists stranded in New York City. And I'm also associated with a university in New York. And I said, oh my God, those people are stranded there and we'd love to bring them, but we can't. They're like, you should come play here. So we had two performances that were live streamed from a gallery down in downtown in New York City. And that's where a lot of things started to become possible. So the live streaming happened. The discussions online with our artists started to happen regularly. So, and what we also did was we paired up with we became part of a discussion, again coming out of a US university, as part of a platform called Impact, which is a platform for arts, culture, and conflict transformation. And we started talking with them about how is it that we can, this is out of Brandeis University if you want to Google it. So we started to think with them, so how can we create a support mechanism around this festival, which is in an island, in a space where we didn't have access to a lot of the time because the checkpoints closed. So when COVID happened and everything happened, the checkpoints closed, so we actually didn't have access to the Home for Cooperation. They opened by the time of the festival, but at the beginning we had no idea if they would be open, so we didn't actually have access to each other. So we kind of went through Zoom to our partners in the US, and we started to think, okay, we want our artists to be on board, we want them to be, we want to work with them. Let's start by thinking with them. So we created a mechanism called the Thinking Partners. The Thinking Partners was, and this was possible due to their generous funding and to our kind of collective imagining of this. So let's create a support mechanism for artists whereby they can speak with a mentor, with whomever. So we asked them, what do you think you need? And then we came up with a group of mentors and we started to pair them up. So there was a Swiss group of two artists that were doing a devised group, and we paired them up with a Greek Cypriot author. There was a group that was doing something on a Korean artist that was doing a visual piece on the buffer zone in Cyprus. We paired her up with an environmentalist. So we created this system whereby people could start to speak, and we asked them to also send us their, the fruits of their thoughts. So we have, thank you. So we have now an online depository of a lot of those discussions, which are in narrative and video and photography on our website, bufferfringe.org. And that really worked for us to have an audience, because we are an island and we also suffer from islandness. So islandness is an illness. And a lot of us suffer from it, and it's basically our tendency to go inward. Sometimes it's very necessary, but other times we need to open up. So as a post-conflict community, we tend to think that, everything is only us, pain, suffering, trauma. So, and after all these years of having this islandness, of suffering greatly, slowly I think opening up is super important. So bringing in these people, having these conversations, bringing in the audience from all around the world mattered to us. And we did a bit of a similar thing in 2021. In 2021, we also had more access to mobility. And that brought us to this year. And in this year, we thought, okay, we do not own the festival anymore, creatively. So we gave it to these wonderful 5 curators that came in to the island. There was a lot of Zooming, obviously, and also speaking with Australia, very complicated. We have exactly 12 hours difference. So it was hell. But yes, we went through a creative process together. What we learned was that a lot of the COVID solidarity magically disappeared. But we kind of struggled through it, and now we're in the post era. And yeah, I don't know, there's a big question mark. What's gonna happen in 2023? But this is where we are. And it's been a really, really fascinating journey with really incredible people. Opening up conversation takes a little bit of money, but it takes mostly time. So I suggest that if you do explore curatorial models and collaboration models, that you make sure that you have the time to invest in it. That is the biggest thing that you can give to any of these processes. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Quite hard act to follow, and I probably just sort of try to complement a little bit of things that have been said before. I'll speak a little bit about my own work, but also particularly about the experience with the Shubak Festival in London. Now, for the non-Arabic speakers, Shubak means window, and our strapline was a window of contemporary Arab culture. A little bit, just to clear up confusion, I ran the Shubak Festival for 10 years. I passed it on to new leadership last year. Fantastic new team with Ali and Tahrid. I work on a number of projects. I got information about what I do now here on a flyer you can have later on. But I've also been presenting Arab artists within and without an Arab culture context. So I've also shown Arab artists in dance festivals, in multi-art form festivals, not just in London, also abroad. And I think the positioning of artists, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, is really important in that. First of all, it was really interesting to hear, your assessment of the current situation in Lebanon, which is catastrophic, which, as you said, is existential. In this country, in the UK at the moment, our newspapers are full every day about the need for growing food banks, for schools complaining that children are coming into school not nourished enough, for old people having to turn their heating down because they're afraid of their rising electricity costs. The theatre that I work in at the moment in Manchester, where Programme Dance, we used to have an electricity bill of £350,000 a year. This has just gone up to 1.2 million a year. We cannot pass this cost onto our ticket prices. Our audiences after the post-pandemic are coming back, but they're coming back slower and not as often, and choose very specific evenings that they want to see. And they want to see mainly having a good, fun night out. And at the moment, there's no price barrier. It's not that the cheaper tickets sell quicker than the more expensive tickets. People are prepared to buy an expensive ticket if they get something that gives them a good time. So our situation is not as difficult as here. And I think the last thing we should get into is comparing who's got, the most difficult or miserable time. But the question about what is essential about festivals and cultures and where the priorities at the moment, those are very fundamental questions that are being asked everywhere in Europe as well as here. But it's really important to come together. And I remember one Zoom meeting we were together in the pandemic, Omar, after the explosion, where you just said, when we said, what can we do? And you said, don't forget us, just come, just be with us, just don't forget us. And I think there's something about the work that I've been trying to do is presenting Arab artists in a place where they have kind of agency and can determine the narratives. And it really, the journey I've been on was kind of presenting the world of Arab artists for kind of 20 years now. Initially, it was against ignorance. It was just our audiences in the UK just thought culture doesn't exist in the Arab world. If I'm putting very bluntly, there were, historic ageless artifacts, the pyramids, or there was chaos and war, and there was nothing in between, if I put it very, very bluntly. So my first motivation was just to say, look, this is what's happening in Beirut, in Tunis, in Cairo. You can like it or not like it, or you can engage with it or not, but it's out there. That was the really important thing. And that's taken a long time to achieve. For that, it took me 3 years to knock on people's doors, on festival doors, to show some Arab choreographers in the UK first. After that, after 9/11 and after the start of the revolutions, the so-called Arab Spring in 2011, there was a lot of interest suddenly. But it came with an expectation of a narrative. It came with an expectation that the work had to be about revolution, about migration, about fleeing, about home, etc. So then the challenge really was positioning the work kind of to counter some of those narratives, at least give artists the agency to tell their own story, kind of from their own position. And that's a very tricky process because our audiences are very diverse. And especially in London, we have very conservative Arab audiences. We've got very progressive Arab audiences. We've got very conservative non-Arab audience and very progressive non-Arab audiences. And and our festival tried to kind of reach quite a lot of them. I want to give you two examples how we did in 2017 and 2021, looked at international collaborations in a new way. In 2017, I always ask myself, how can we be a festival of contemporary Arab culture and also present progressive or interesting festival experience in the festival? We are a festival of Arab culture. It's not only about showing Arab artists' work. And I've been so inspired by visiting so many festivals in the Arab world. So we invited two festivals to co-curate certain strands of our festivals. And those were two festivals where I felt, just through visiting them, that they thought very deeply about their roots in their community, the process, how they arrived at work, and how they presented it, but arrived at two very different outcomes. And one was the local Nahna al-Amar al-Jiran festival that Aurelien Zucchi created, who you will meet in a couple of days' time. And the other one was the Dream City Festival in Tunis. So we invited those festival directors to come to spend some time with us in London, to think through how their model could not be replicated, but be morphed into a meaningful and relevant model for two London locations. And they created then two very particular strands, the Nahna al-Amal Jiran Festival, something in a street market in West London with a very, very diverse population, and the Dream City Festival in one part of London that was experienced very severe gentrification, and it looked at the tension of long-standing communities and gentrification. It was, you were said this, it was time-consuming. It was very expensive because we not only brought artists over, but we also brought these curators over. Those curators mainly brought collectives over that were not just one person, but were several people. So the whole infrastructure became very big, and also made it very expensive for the kind of outcome that was there. So I thought it was a really interesting experiment, a very relevant dialogue to do as a festival-to-festival exchange. In 2021, because our festival had to be hybrid, we couldn't invite people in because of quarantining and COVID. We disseminated a lot of the festival program into the region. We thought, how can we be the most helpful when we can show work online? So we commissioned work to be created across the Arab region with partners. Our online film program, dance film program, was curated by the Ramallah International Dance Festival. We worked with Khaled Al-Bey to do live streams from Khartoum, from Gaza. We did a live stream of a dance performance from Saudi. We worked with poets in Suleimania in Iraq, and the festival became a much more dispersed, multi-location festival. And I got really, really interested in this. And this was particularly also at the period where we in Europe had significant COVID support. Artists could get grants from governments to at least keep a basic income or get funding. In most of the Arab countries, this was just non-existent. So we actually spent a lot more money for creation in the region that then was digitized, that we could show on our platform. My dream was also that it would increase international audiences, and that, the young DJ in Algiers, that created a DJ set, could say to his mate down the road, look, tonight I'm in Shubak, you can watch me, and you don't have to travel to London to see this. That's a long journey. That only worked in some instances, certainly not in all of them. But the principle of disseminating and looking at multi-location festivals is something I found very interesting. And I think now we grapple with post-COVID, what is the model now? Is it to go down this line, or do we now all come back to our own locations and say, this was fine, this was an exceptional to work in that international fashion? No, everything has to be on the ground again. The last thing I want to say, and you actually started with this, and this question about what you said, don't forget us, engage with us, come and visit us. I think at the moment there's a significant pull from the Gulf, particularly from Saudi, at the moment to invest in culture, to position the Gulf globally as a major cultural player. In the visual arts, it's very much succeeded already, especially in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. In the performing arts, it's beginning, but it's a very, very active momentum at the moment. And I think the question of who funds what and how artists negotiate their positioning into this. We've worked with artists, who in many countries who fundamentally refuse to have anything to do with their governments. And we mainly work with artists in the independent scene. In Saudi, it's a very complicated picture at the moment because there is a significant opening of the cultural scene, which is very top-down, but it is supported also by the artists on the ground as the only means to create works, and it comes with resources. And artists are very smart and very clever where they position themselves in that sort of spectrum, in not kind of subscribing to a particular narrative or running along with it because it's really, really beneficial to further their creativity. And I think we as festival directors, we have a tough job to understand the nuances of those situations that artists are in, and negotiate them and make sure that artists have the kind of power and agency to at least understand, at best really control the narratives in which they're presented.
Great. Thank you very much for those 4 inputs. I think they've been really useful in providing some kind of a context for regional cooperation. Is it not working? It's working now, yeah? Okay. So maybe just to summarize some of the issues that arose out of the 4 presentations that I think are kind of useful for us to bear in mind when talking about regional cooperation. The first big thing is funding, and the three aspects around it. First of all, the political nature of funding in terms of the culture diplomacy intentions of particular funders, the Gulf wanting to, project itself globally. Sources of funding, international funding, and the role that it plays, traditional funding from the unique sources, the EU kind of national institutes of culture, how they've traditionally supported things. And then the ethics of funding for people to consider those 3 things, when talking about funding. Secondly, the issue of infrastructure, where one presents work, publicly funded places versus independent spaces versus non-formal spaces. That seems to be a theme as well. The issue of mobility, visas not only between these particular regions and the big global players like Europe and America and the like that have been traditional complicated mobility kinds of programs, but even between countries within the region as well. Curation, who puts the works together, who decides, does one co-curate, and what does that mean in terms of time that you need, resources to be able to make these kinds of things happen. The issue of censorship, not only political censorship, but cultural and social censorship, which is kind of linked to the issue of audiences. Who do you play to? where's your box office? You've got progressive audiences, but you've also got very conservative audiences. How do you manage that? Then there's the different contexts. How do you do art in contexts where people are really struggling just to survive? So the ethics around that, and how do you as arts people work within those environments? And then the final thing is how to support artists, how to make sure that the people who are doing the creative work find ways to not only survive but to earn a decent living through what it is that they do, given all of these kinds of challenges. So I'm not sure if that kind of summarizes some of the key points that we need to bear in mind when developing regional projects in this particular region. But I wanted to maybe just open it up to you folk to ask any questions, to make any comments based on the inputs that you have heard. We will have a facilitated conversation here, but also just to invite anybody who'd like to add anything from any of the particular regions that you come from that you'd like to add to what anybody has said. Yeah, Christina? Would you like to come and take a microphone?
So for me, and we were talking about it with many people, the performances of last night really resonated. And I mean, for our festival in Cyprus, we started off by talking about ideas of resilience and self-sufficiency in the middle of the crisis in 2013. And going back to what Ellada said, the specific case of Cyprus is that we tend to go inward and kind of think that we are just our traumas, etc. And also going back to your point, Eckhard, is that on the other side is that you don't always want to be your national narrative. So I don't always want to be, as a creator, as a creative director, or as an artist, representative of my country's issues. And there's more things to talk about. So in that sense, what we saw last night, it felt really brave and very radical even, because it was also very close. So in Cyprus, we have the Cypriot issue that it's very rare to see that we approach it with humor and satire, and it's been more than 40 years. It's quite sensitive, it's quite a taboo still. So for a lot of us, I think we were kind of pleasantly surprised that people would be self-critical and laugh at their own demise, and also how they treated this explosion. But I was wondering to what extent it also comes with ethical implications, of course, and possible issues. So my question was, to what extent can these sort of performances be triggering, or to what extent can they lead to trauma recovery? And what have you done in order to mitigate this, to kind of see ahead this possibility? So, for instance, I'm specifically thinking about the second performance at the, I don't remember the name. Yes, that was, it had a lot of satire, a lot of irony, really powerful. But yeah. Yes. Sunflower. Yes.
Questions from people? No, not right now. Okay.
I wish I staged that play so I could answer more accurately. But what I can say, I will not speak about anticipation. I will speak about, I usually, because I'm a theater director, I usually speak about the magic of theater. When you start a process of creation while staging a play, and then something happens. And oh my God, it's magic. I was like playing for a whole month, and then the last day with the audience, it worked. And that it's a magical moment. I think also in a curatorial point of view, when you start curating, it's a little bit, when you start to do your program, it's a little bit of a mess in the beginning. You do not understand what you're doing. You're putting people, then you're putting people because you put people, and then you cannot not put those people. You see what we're in Beirut, it's a village. So if you don't want to be killed, you have sometimes to program people or to be socially persona non grata. And the ISAM comes also with this curatorial line where we program the post-war artists. And this satire we're speaking about, it's was present in the theater in Lebanon in the 90s, at the time where Isam was 21, 22, the student of Roger Assaf, the student is inspired by Ziad al-Rahbani, where in order to cope with what was 10,000 times more violent than what we're living right now. We're speaking about a post-carnage period, a post-massacre period, a period where having a Kalashnikov in your car is random, and people were there were snipers everywhere. And Isam comes from that generation. The satire comes from that generation. And what worked in the curatorial line, that we understood why also we brought back that generation in order also for us, the next generation, to understand what is the coping mechanism that we need to deal with. And last year, in the beginning of this year, we premiered the play, and we didn't premiere the play. We performed the play called I Hate Theater, I Love Pornography. That is pure satire on everything that is happening. This play, we started creating it in 2013. We did an open studio of it in Norway. In Norway, they like everything anyway. Whatever you do, they love it. They come, they hug you, and then they invite you to dinner. We love Norwegian people. Then we performed it in India. In India also, they love you. They come and they hug you and they love whatever you do. Not exactly, but they are lovely people. Then we performed it in Beirut in 2015, also as an open studio. I'm not going to enter in the detail of the performance. I speak about fundings, obscenity, and how artists play the victims in order. It's a theater company prostituting itself to the West in order to get funding. In 2015, we performed it in Beirut, and in front of curators, of Lebanese audience, and they hated it. And after that play, we were persona non grata in Europe for 2 years because it was criticizing curators, it was criticizing fundings, it was criticizing how the West looks at you, it was making fun of all the massacre that is happening in Lebanon and Syria, and it was making fun of everything. Great, they hated it. Nobody loves us, as usual. We represented it in directly after the explosion. On the first days, they opened the theater after the confinement. So people were confined, there was an explosion, then people were confined, then they opened a week during, just before Christmas. We performed it because we needed to perform it. And then it worked. It worked like we didn't change the play. The city changed. We needed that coping mechanism again. It was correct again. So this satire, it's a coping mechanism in order to have a distance with the atrocity that we are living in. Not just us, the planet. The problem is that I cannot run away anymore from Lebanon to London. I won't know how to survive in London because I do not have the coping mechanism of the British. I know how to survive here. There it would be like a jungle for me. Just to have to fill tax papers. I'm just giving an example, but no. So yes, it's the magic of the curation. And then how it works, it will work with when we will see the play of tonight, maybe that have another approach because it's a younger person where it's more poetic. our generation, that it's more, we do not believe anymore in anything, not even in having fun. We are the nihilistic, depressed generation. And how this curation line is just, at the end of the day, is just showing us coping mechanism. It's a survival kit. I advise everyone to have one for the next 10 years. You were asking what is 2023. You said, let's see what 2023 is hiding for us. I got goosebumps. I said, oh my God, no.
Yeah, just to clarify, you don't pay taxes in Lebanon? Milena has a question. It's just a joke. Yeah. Yeah. Aha. Ah. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so what you said and also what Christina asked actually resonated in Serbia as well. We have a lot of post-war, of course, the topics, and you know, sometimes when you go to see some movie which is new production and it talks about it, and everybody leaves the hall and is like, we're never going to stop talking about it, and it resonates with these expectations. You know, when you bring a theater show from Lebanon or wherever, or from Ukraine, you know, you have some expectations what it will be about. But my question is, how can you avoid talking about this? You know, is it possible to not talk about this through artistic production and to send something else elsewhere, or produce or deal with these topics which are not the crisis or the war when it's so present and so, you know, in the society it's sensible? Does my question make sense? Yeah.
Of course, it is possible to talk about it, I would say, and artists will always reflect the time that they live in. I think, for me, the question is also, what is the specific take and voice and nuance of that artist? And is the imagery or the symbolism or the story, does it immediately go to the first solution available? So, for instance, in our 2015 festival, you know, there was a lot of work out there that was about migration. It was the time when so many Syrians fled to Turkey and then went on boats to Turkey. There's a lot of work out there at that time that had boats and life jackets as part of the work. You know, there were all these stories coming out. But there were the same stories that were told journalistically too. So for me, that was a sort of dividing line. If we tell this story about migration, if we tell this story about Syrians fleeing Syria and going to Turkey, coming from Turkey to Europe, what is the difference to a journalistic story? And what symbols and images does this work capture? So we were looking for artists who had kind of a different take and a more personal or surprising nuance than the obvious imagery. And I think then you can open up really a whole other way of talking and engaging.
No. I wanted to maybe move on just because I don't want us to become too content oriented in this particular discussion now, because we're kind of talking more about regional cooperation and some of the issues around it. So I just wanted to ask another question that maybe takes us into another direction, and that is that obviously because of the conflicts within countries and within the region, there's a huge diaspora. So people kind of leave to go elsewhere. And I wanted to know the extent to which those diasporas play a role within your countries and within the arts, potentially or in real life. I mean, for example, and I know that when people leave the country as artists, they obviously also struggle then to make a living wherever they go to, so one can't necessarily rely on them, but can they become ambassadors for the work that you do, for example, and the broader kind of diaspora as people make their make their livelihoods in Australia or in London or in America, can they be organized in such a way so as to send remittances back to support not just society generally, but the arts in particular? So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Totally forget you.
Yeah.
No, it's first because it's a very fashionable thing in Lebanon. After the 1st of August, during the inflation, even the government was speaking about it. It's the diaspora, they left the countries, they should remember us, they should say, they left the country, they don't want to hear about the country anymore. Maximum, they can send $100, $200 to their grandma to survive. They're not responsible of the country. They left the country. And so it's nothing to count on. And it's good for them that they left the country. I think, and for artists that leave the country, they are stigmatized by the fact that they are artists in exile, that everybody is expecting from them to do art in exile, art as artists in exile. That means that work cannot come back to Lebanon and cannot live outside of Lebanon, for example, as only art in exile. So economically, artistically, diaspora, we should leave them alone. Let them survive in the jungle that is UK, Berlin. We should not put so much pressure on them.
Can I
Is
say
that the experience elsewhere? Yeah?
Yes,
Lina?
I want to talk about it from a different perspective. There are artists in Jordan who went and lived in Cairo, for example, in Egypt, not because they wanted to immigrate or leave, but because there were opportunities for them there to be in cinema. You know, like we have examples like Iyad Nassar, Sabah Mbarak, you know, these are Jordanian actors who found a way there. And by becoming famous in the Arab world, in the Egyptian cinema, they were able also to become producers and produce films with Jordanians, and some of them were nominated for awards and stuff like that. So there is also this, which I thought was good for artists to travel to other Arab countries like Europeans do. You know, residencies, for example, are also a very good example of how artists can spend not just a week or two, but spend a year or a couple of weeks. We had like Diptyque, you know, the French dance company. They did a residency in Jordan in preparation for the next festival, ACDF, to do a performance with Jordanian dancers and French dancers. So this travel or leaving for different reasons is very useful and effective, I think.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So just kind of two things from our experience. So as I mentioned before, one of our curatorial teams this year was made up of a Cypriot Australian whose grandparents had migrated to Australia in the 60s. And she was married to an Australian producer, both absolutely fantastic people. And we paired them up with a Cyprus-based theater director. And what that opened up, what that collaboration opened up for us was actually the link to artists in Australia, Cypriot Australian artists, which is something that probably has never happened before. And that also allowed, kind of going back to your question, it allowed us, through them, to diversify the selection of works and also how it is that they were placed in the space. They came in with a completely different look of the space of Nicosia, a city with a lot of layers, and it allowed us to say, oh, yes, we can actually place our gaze in another position and see these works that may have to do with the conflict, that may have to do with the trauma in a completely different light. So I think that the connection between people working on the ground with the diaspora can actually inform the choices having to do with the heavy things, right? And what we hope to, one possibility for 2023 is that we will actually bring quite a few works from Australia, from Cypriot Australian artists that have a lot of work on queer issues that we're now starting to talk about in new ways, and we're very much looking forward to it. But yes, in terms of the heavy things, you can have conversations that you can have these moments where you're like, of course it's like this, you know, completely different look. And that helps you keep a balance.
Eckhard, your...
Yeah, we've never really made a big dividing line or difference between kind of diasporic artists and artists in the region, also recognizing that a lot of artists travel and work between both. There's also been really interesting that been some artists, Arab artists born in the UK who then moved into the region for at least for a considerable number of years to kind of re-engage on a personal level, but also on a creative level with creation. So I think that there's a very important discussion and engagement and dialogue to be had between diasporic artists and communities and artists kind of on the ground. I think it will become even more a hybrid landscape than one that's so separate.
Maybe just to end off the session, a question that has two parts to it, and also just if you folk could answer. What has been very impressive over the last 2 days has been the audiences. Amazing audiences. I mean, see these full houses has been incredibly impressive. So I suppose the question is the appetite that audiences have for local work versus international work. Is it that audiences in a post-COVID situation are so wanting to come back to the theatre that this is why we are seeing them, or is it that it is particularly local artists that they are coming to support? So just to ask the question broadly, what is the appetite for the arts at the moment in your respective countries? And what is the appetite for international work by itself versus work that includes internationals as well as locals? And then the second part of the question is, because people have mentioned it about, the difficulties that people may face with regard to elements of safety. You might get some conservatives who are disrupting audiences or disrupting performances or whatever, things like that. So people who are maybe working across the region would be interested to know how safe are they if they are going to be traveling and working. If you have to curate so that you don't die, what do internationals have to be aware of? And I think these are legitimate concerns. I come from a country where there's a particular kind of reputation for violence and so on, and that's what internationals want to know. Like how safe are we if we come and work in your country? So if each of you can maybe pick up on those two questions, and if there is any research that gets done with audiences. Or are you simply presenting the work and hoping that audiences come? Or do you actually research audiences and see what it is that they particularly want to see? Maybe we'll start the other way around and end with you for a change. Start with Ellada. You only have a response?
Is it okay if I hear a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Lina, do you want to go?
I forgot the question.
So have I.
Security. Let me start with the last one.
Start with security, yeah.
Yeah. It's age, I can't. Regarding security, I think it's an overrated issue, because I would feel less safe in New York than in Lebanon or in Yemen, for that matter. So I think maybe Yemen is an exaggeration because there is war. So it's a relative issue, what you hear with Lebanon. I'm so close. What I saw on the news no, there are so many demonstrations, it's a mess, blah, blah. You come to Beirut, and this is the most beautiful city on earth. يعني we felt so safe, so welcomed. Everything is working. صح عمر? Everything is working beautifully, the audiences. So, you know, where is the safety issue here? I think it's an exaggeration. As artists, it's our responsibility to tell others that it is okay. People were not coming to Jordan when the war in Syria, the civil war, happened, and in Iraq. Even though we're quite far away, but on the map we're very close, and it was perfectly safe to be in Jordan. But the image, the political media, the media also portrays you as a violent area, and that. So this is on the safety issue. And regarding audience, people in the Arab region are very emotional, nostalgic. They would rather see a local production that deals with a political issue, okay? Our communities are very political. You talk to a taxi driver who has finished 6th grade, and he will know about politics more than a person who has done political science, you know? So we live in a political environment. Therefore, people want to identify with what is being performed for them. It's like respecting them. So, why are you laughing? Yeah? They will. عشان هيك. لا هلا مخابرات is everywhere, you know, in the audience, in your institutions. But at least we can create. So people identify with their own themes, and then there's this curiosity to see what others are doing. And I feel that people are biased in the Arab region to see and support Arab.
Secret Service.
Secret Service, yes. To support like an Iraqi production, even if it's not so good. People will go and see an Iraqi production or a Moroccan or and not see another one because of this feeling of Arab solidarity that has been shattered by politicians and by the West and by all of this. So there is this feeling, especially now, it's more than ever before. This feeling of unity, you know. And also they would like to learn about other productions, you know, so out of curiosity, they will go and see foreign productions. Language is important, and you see artists, international artists are going towards less text-based productions and more on movement and technology. So for me, I'm losing the essence of theater. Theater is about stories and, you know, and seeing actors perform, not just multimedia screens and all these special effects. I don't know. So it depends on the generation that is watching and the political context. So also where you're coming from matters to the Arab people, which country you represent.
Cool, thank you. Eckhard, any comments?
Generally, the UK, I think, really struggles with international representations in international theatre. It's very hard to get an audience for international theatre, especially if it's in a foreign language. The UK is not as international as other countries in Europe. I mean, I'm from Germany originally, but if you look at the scenes in Belgium, in Holland, in France, in Germany, the UK is a much more conservative theatre scene. So it's actually slightly easier to show dance and music than spoken word theatre with subtitles. The simple fact that something is international is not a box office bonus, on the contrary. It's probably not, especially outside London, where I do a lot of my programming at the moment. So the destination is very often festivals that contextualize the work, or working directly with local communities. So when we, for instance, brought over Les Acrobates Étrangères from Morocco, we worked a lot with Moroccan communities and brought them as audiences, and for a very conservative audience, for them it was really a sense of validation, seeing themselves represented on London stage for the first time, visiting an institution, a London cultural institution that they thought wasn't for them. So this is something that one can do through international performances. It's not a main attraction. Then it becomes a very nuanced picture, especially in music. The nationality of the singer, something plays a big role. So when we had an evening with Kairouki and Tanya Saleh, you could just tell half the audience was Lebanese, half the audience was Egyptian. The Egyptians sang along to Kairouki, and the Lebanese sang along to Tanya Saleh, putting it slightly exaggerated, but there is a sort of a national audience from particular national figures or singers, more in music than in theatre or dance. So it's a complex picture where the audience are. When it comes to safety, you know, the UK is a safe country, most cases as such. We have done events that were for invited audiences only, where we felt that the artists themselves would be at risks. There were, for instance, queer artists from Egypt who were very worried that the mukhabarat might be in their audiences. We presented the work of a UK-based Egyptian writer who wrote the play under a pseudonym because she was worried about repercussions for her family back in Egypt. So she was safe. She lives in the UK, she works in the UK, but she was worried about certain repercussions of friends and families back in their countries. Same with some Algerian queer artists. So the safeguarding of artists is really important to not just look at the artists themselves, but their kind of whole situation and where the risks are there, and really needs to be negotiated with each artist individually.
Thank you. That's a very important point. You want to say anything, Elodie? So you donate? Yeah. I just want to, okay, then Omar, you want to end off?
Regarding the audience, I was thinking when we did the festival and we fixed the festival dates, none of us watch football, so none of us knew that there will be the Mondial in the same time. So I was expecting empty rooms, actually. But then I have Twitter like 99% of the planet, and I was reading what is happening in the Mondial, especially the fact that it's Qatar, that Saudi Arabia won on Argentina, and Maradona, the ghost of Maradona is completely, stuff like that, and the fact that Qatar is systematically forbidding LGBTQ symbols, and so the Mondial is not anymore what it used to be, kind of. It's more about the polemic of the Mondial than the game itself. So I wasn't interested in anything that is happening related to the game. I was interested in all the polemic around it. So when we say that this event that gather people from all around the world together, concentrated on the same event, on a friendly fight, let's say, of confrontation or competition without a death toll of, now we're speaking just about how many foreign workers died while doing this, while preparing for the Mondial. We're speaking about all the causes, everything that Qatar represents. And I think people are lost the meaning of what is it to be together nowadays. And I like to believe this is what make our audiences full, that they are not finding that anymore in stuff like football, as much as it's been politicized, perverted, taken by the market, and they're not finding a reason to be together with anyone around stuff like football, and they're trying to search for a meaning or trying to be in the same room with people around something that is not a controversy created by politicians. That's one. Concerning the safety, no, Lebanon is not anymore a safe country as it was. During the last 3 years, I've been threatened to death 2 or 3 times. Let's say, with my daughter too. You see the extent of the violence of the threat that have never been before. I do not advise any any woman to walk in any streets in Lebanon at any time of the day anymore, which I used to do 3 years ago. There is no electricity. It's systematic trying to steal the phone, systematic trying to steal the hand luggage. This is honest security. I walk in the street. The street for the car are not anymore safe as they used to be. They were never safe, but there is no maintenance, so it's not even safe to go in a car. There is no, so the city is not safe in a mechanism. We all put chlor nowadays in our water tanks because we're afraid of cholera. It's a big no-no. Nobody speaks about it. The outbreak is still contained. This is, I've been asked this question before you come. The outbreak is still contained. Of course, it's the poor people that are, we as privileged are not in direct danger of that, but people who cannot afford drinking water because Nestle privatized most of the drinking water in Lebanon. The poor that cannot afford drinking water have to drink tap water, and it's dangerous. This is security, does it? I do not post anything on Facebook anymore. My opinions, I keep them for me, or I say them in a contained, because it's stupid to go to prison or to be arrested, or even to go and spend 1 hour at the cops because you said that thing or that thing. So if you scroll down my Facebook line, you will notice that I even do not rarely put pictures of my family. 3 years ago, just before the last Beirut Pride, when was it? 3.5 years ago, let's say. We organized the Beirut Pride. An event of the Beirut Pride was organized in our studio. There was a reading of text of homophobic experiences from all over the world, written by Romanian writer. There was 7 young persons. The event was about to start, and we had 40 persons from security services arriving to the studio and threatening to close it if we do not stop the reading. Next year, anything that is related, this year also, and it made anything related to LGBTQ in Lebanon is being systematically fought. Ministry of Interior did a decision that is against the law, against the constitution, forbidding any march, anything that is related to LGBTQ subjects. And in North and South, LGBTQ people are not anymore as safe as they used to be. Even in Beirut, extreme right Christians, so that just to be clear on it, it's not Muslims. Extreme right Christians are the direct threat for the LGBTQ community in their own areas, because LGBTQ community is in these areas, which are the cultural areas also in the same time. We are supposed to apply for censorship for any play we present. For us, for this festival, we've decided with the artists not to apply for any text. We are still expecting comeback, but I think they do not have enough money to buy gas to arrive to the studio, or they are taken by the Mondial, or I doubt it because, for example, one of the play, as soon as we boosted it, the play of Ali Shahrour was, have directly received threats on because saying that it's promoting homosexuality and blah, blah, blah. Same threads that happened in the same way to Hamid Sinno, that is a singer a few years ago, which is one also of the events that say, no, Lebanon is not anymore a haven for security. It's not Saudi Arabia yet, but or Iran, but.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's a very sobering note. So, just on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for again being our co-host and for being here this morning in the midst of your festival. Please run off and just a big round of applause for Omar. Thank you. And we shall see you later.